And I think going back to stigma, like how stigma drives secrecy, how stigma fuels shame and can make people retreat. And I don't know, like, I just think imagine if he could have said that more openly, that either I'm bored or said like, here's what I'm doing.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal. I would love to see a society that had reached that level of maturity where, if you're an adult and you've made a decision that's not hurting anyone else, own it. And especially if it's one that, if you're doing something that does carry potential risk, other people should know about that. Your family should know about it. Your friends should know about it. Anybody who's, close to you should definitely know. And I can't imagine how many more people are dying because of that part of stigma where they maybe, I look at myself and I think, how many times did I pick up the phone and then put it back down, pick up the phone and put it back down, even with calling out for help from the pharmacy association. And then with my parents, like it took long. It was, I don't know how long before, like it was years, I guess, really, before I let them know how serious the situation had become. And that's a weird thing when you think about it, you know, like I love those people. Those people love me. I would want to know if they were struggling that way. Why wouldn't I tell them, and it's,
it makes me think like, first of all, I totally agree with you. And my relationship with hydromorphone and opiates didn't start until after my grandpa had died. But I was thinking, got me thinking, like, imagining what if that wasn't the case? What if he had been still alive? And my grandpa and I talked about everything. We had a relationship where we could talk about the wildest things. And he, was very much into the internet and very much into current events and what was going on. And when I think back to like when I was really struggling, imagining he could have been a person in my life that I could have had a really frank and fascinating conversation with. And he would have been someone I think who would have really got it. And
absolutely. Yeah. He lived through it. I mean, he saw that change. He saw the cultural shift. He went from being celebrated as a doctor and by the way, here's this gift for, everybody knows that you're into the Nova Hystex, to like having to quietly disclose what had happened that had made him lose consciousness. That's quite a, like, I don't know. I mean, kudos to the guy for living that kind of, taking on that kind of challenge. I mean, my God, that must have been, I try to imagine, but pretty much impossible to imagine the burden of that responsibility. And then these days there's so much protection in place. Like we live in a very just overly safe society, and back then it was, you kind of have to have a certain level of common sense because we're not that far out of the wild yet, and you had to be able to take care of yourself. And there was way more personal accountability. We tended, I think, it wasn't, that generation didn't, I don't think I saw my grandfather, grandmother blame anyone else ever for their own problems. Like they just didn't, that's not the way they thought. They're very accountable, responsible, and disciplined in comparison to what we see now. Yeah,
with like tremendous ingenuity and tenacity and bravery, like for real.
Yes, and dignity, like right to the end of dignity.
Yeah,
it's
and for me, I think my need to share this story it has always lingered as like a kind of a quieter story within my family. And when I think about like what this process of me sharing my own story with the world has been that it is sort of like I've described, helped me to get behind my story and relieve some of that shame and relieve that, like the cloak of stigma, and it's made me feel differently. And I don't want to think back to him and associate any of that shame with his story or stigma with his story. And it's like, no, he was doing the best he could. He screwed up in many ways, I'm sure, I know, but was also heroic and all of these wonderful things. And none of that is affected by the fact that he had a relationship with hydrocodone.
Absolutely.
It is not, it does not define him. And it's not to be sort of labeled or burdened with sort of a shameful stamp.
Yes.
As we are encouraging of everyone else in our community.
Oh,
I look back at him and say, like, let's push all that other shit that was attached to that aside.
Yeah. Thankfully. Yeah. That's, that has really got to come to an end. Like, I mean, we are a society that has never been more obsessed with trying to categorize things. And, I never thought much about it until I started looking deeply into the world of addiction and realizing the impact that these labels are having. And you can't have it. You can't be starting, and I, not to knock on AA or whatever, but that model of getting up in front of people and introducing yourself as an addict or an alcoholic, not good.
No,
it's one of the last things you should be doing or encouraging people to do. People don't need to be reminded about that particular struggle that they're having. What they need to do is grow as a human being and realize that there is a difference between them as a person and them and the struggle they're having with whatever substance. It is not one thing and the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And again, why I share that story is that if it is a 95-year-old retired physician or a 25-year-old person out on the street or nurse or pharmacist or whatever, it's like, it's the same.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone has different things that got them there. Everyone has different pains and different traumas, there's also like so many common threads that you can see. And one of those common threads is that people feel misunderstood and feel either forgotten or pushed aside or stigmatized.
Mm-hmm.
And that is common across the board. And the common thread there, that is something that connects all of us, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that it's mental laziness. That's what I recognize in myself when I like anything to do with categorization that makes things easier. That's what our brain is basically constantly trying to take an efficient route to save glucose. It doesn't want to use energy it doesn't need. So if it can put something unknown or unexamined into a category, it will. Yeah. And that's fine, but you don't have to take it literally, and realize what that is. It's just a mechanism to, that prepares you sometimes for what's coming down the road, but not all the time. It can't be trusted completely. And that's why you have to leave room for rational examination. And you can't, it's lazy thinking the same way that, I can recognize that there's difference between men and women. I can recognize that there's differences between races as far as like what my eyes are telling me and the cultural background and stuff. But that doesn't mean that I have to immediately assume something about that individual. And, even though it's easier to just do that, and there's a little bit of a kind of a speed bump in my head I have to go over to do that. I think it's the same type of thinking, especially if you work directly. I've heard how healthcare professionals talk about, working in a methadone in pharmacies where there's lots of methadone patients. Some healthcare professionals, they just, here comes another one. They've made that error early and they've solidified it so that that is a box that they're keeping those people in, and it absolutely taints the way they're dealing with that customer base, whether they realize it or not.
Yeah.
And usually it's for the worse, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to go.
Our policymakers do the same thing, by sort of not appreciating how the impact of their words, the impact of the language that they use, and is the policy that they're endorsing supporting keeping those stigmas present, or is it actually changing that? And so, again, I don't know if that requires a whole sort of deep dive into our education system. But I
don't think that our system is like the system that we grew up with. I don't think that's flawed. I think that right now we are being manipulated more forcefully by groups that are interested in the narrative, or whatever you call this culture, staying the same. They don't, in fact, it seems to be that the real push is anything that's inflammatory, anything that causes division. And I think it's fairly clear that you could clearly see that happening. And I think it's also clear what some motives may be to make that division stay and make it strong, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a lot harder to come together as one and push back against globalization or authoritarian rule or more bizarre laws, whatever you want to call it. If everybody's divided, they're very easy to manipulate.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you.